On the day I received my leukemia diagnosis, the world seemed to halt as the doctor's voice reverberated like a distant echo, each syllable shrouded in unbearable sorrow. Dr. John's face, masked in compassionate professionalism, delivered his apology as if grief itself had taken form. I distinctly recall his words cutting through the haze. "The test results are conclusive, you have leukemia." I staggered out of the examination room, and, in a blur of anguish, found myself at my car. Seated behind the wheel, tears carved rivers down my face and the engine remained silent under my trembling hands. How could this be? I was only 35, with an entire life and a family who depended on me. The word leukemia thundered inside me like an unceasing bell, its clangs each summoning new waves of terror and despair. After what felt like endless hours, I forced myself to drive home with my mind whirling in a tumult of bitter thoughts. With every mile, I rehearsed the words I would speak to my husband Andrew, to my mother-in-law Donna, who lived with us, and how I would reveal it to my little daughter Charlotte, even as anxiety gripped me thinking of their reactions. Amidst the turmoil, a fragile spark of hope emerged. I convinced myself I would uncover the support and love I so desperately needed from them. At home, I paused at the doorstep to swallow my fear, drew in a deep, trembling breath, and stepped inside where Andrew and Donna sat absorbed in the television. Their eyes, filled with half-hearted curiosity, met mine as I announced with a wavering voice that I needed to talk. Andrew switched off the television, and their expectant expressions deepened the silence. Seated on the sofa with clammy hands, I confessed that I had seen the doctor that day, that the diagnosis was leukemia. The ensuing silence was more deafening than any outburst. I had braced myself for shock, for concern, perhaps even tears, but instead, I was met with a dismissal so cold it felt like a blow. Andrew, the man I had shared a decade of life with, let out a dry, short laugh that struck me like a stinging slap, insisting it was nothing but anemia. I protested desperately, my voice cracking as I insisted the doctor had been unequivocal. Donna's eyes flashed with a mixture of contempt and disbelief as her words slashed through me like a knife. She accused me of dramatics and attention-seeking. I could hardly fathom how the people who were meant to love me could be so cruelly indifferent, my pain eclipsed by their callous skepticism. Anger mingled with despair until fresh tears welled up, this time born from betrayal rather than fear. My voice trembled as I demanded to know how they could dismiss my truth, unable to believe they thought I had conjured such a serious affliction from thin air. Andrew, rising with a mocking smile, suggested bitterly that if I craved attention, I might try art classes instead of concocting false illnesses. Donna echoed his sentiment, condescendingly noting that I was too young for leukemia, a malady reserved for either the very old or the very young, but never for someone in the prime of life. I felt as if I had stepped into a surreal nightmare where my pain was trivialized. The home that should have been a sanctuary turned into a suffocating space where the walls closed in with every mocking word. "How can you be so cruel?" I whispered, barely audible over my sobs, as my tears, each heavy with betrayal, fell silently. Through my anguished cries, I insisted that I had just received earth-shattering news while they sneered and accused me of deceit. Andrew advanced, his face now a mask of feigned concern that only deepened my agony, offering patronizing platitudes about getting a second opinion, as if my diagnosis were a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over by bureaucratic reassurance. I recoiled as if his touch might burn, declaring firmly that what I needed was not another consultation, but my family's unyielding trust and support. Donna's exasperated sigh was like another blow, dismissing my pain as if I habitually made mountains out of molehills, suggesting instead that a good night's sleep might erase this living nightmare. In that crushing moment, something within me shattered. The cold cadence of her words and the total lack of empathy overwhelmed me, and I fled the room, ascending the stairs as if each step carried the weight of betrayal. In the supposed safety of my bedroom, I collapsed into a heap of sobs, unable to comprehend how those who were meant to protect me could be so indifferent in my time of despair. For hours, I replayed the living room scene over and over, the shared laughter, the sneers, the incredulous glances, and felt utterly abandoned by the very people I once trusted. As night fell and an oppressive silence enveloped the house, I made a gut-wrenching decision. I could not fight this battle encircled by disbelief and scorn. Gathering every shred of inner strength, I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and dialed Melissa's number, my closest friend and the beacon of empathy in my darkest hour. Her warm, concerned voice was a healing balm to my battered soul as I whispered her name through my tears, confessing that I had been given the worst diagnosis of my life, while my own family dismissed it as mere fabrication. In that fragile moment, a glimmer of hope broke through the despair. Though my blood kin had failed me, Melissa's unwavering support reminded me that I was not alone in this shadowed struggle. As my family slept, I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart heavy with the realization that my leukemia diagnosis had unleashed not only a personal health catastrophe, but a deeper, more devastating loneliness, a betrayal by those who should have been my strongest pillars. The physical and emotional exhaustion converged until I found myself staring blankly at the dark ceiling, paralyzed by grief and the bitter taste of rejection. Then, as if destiny had woven another thread into this tapestry of sorrow, I resolved to leave that suffocating house. I packed my meager belongings with trembling hands, stuffing in every scrap of essential documents and cherished memories. Each object, a painful relic of a past tainted by neglect, reminded me how many signs of cruelty I had once overlooked. With my back hastily closed, I retrieved my phone and called Melissa again. Her sleepy concern blossomed into full alertness, as she vowed to shelter me. After a brief silence that felt like an eternity, she assured me that her home was now mine, and that together we would carve out a new path amid the ruins of my shattered life. Clutching the note I left on our kitchen table, a brief message explaining my need for solitude and space, I quietly slipped out the back door, the cool morning air mingling with an unexpected taste of liberation, despite the deep, raw pain inside me. On the bus to Melissa's sanctuary, I watched the familiar streets of my old life recede into the distance. Every passing building, park, and corner now belonged to a chapter that no longer defined me. When I arrived at Melissa's house, exhausted yet enveloped by a gentle calm, she greeted me with an embrace as strong and warm as the one I had craved from my own family. In that moment, I felt, for the first time since the diagnosis, that I was safe. Over the following days, as I recovered from the betrayal, a resolute determination grew within me, a determination to sever the toxic ties with Andrew, Donna, and Charlotte. Although it pained me deeply, I realized I must surround myself with those who genuinely cared, those who would help me fight not just the physical ravages of leukemia, but the bitter isolation inflicted by callous indifference. In the quiet sanctuary of Melissa's guest room, I resolved to forge a new family, one built on trust, love, and understanding. The fresh morning air that greeted me as I walked toward the bus stop carried with it the promise of new beginnings, even as my mind raced with the daunting tasks ahead, contacting my doctor, planning my treatment, and finding a support group that could help me navigate the storm of cancer. Yet even as the memory of my old life faded, the feelings of betrayal lingered, a reminder that sometimes the most treacherous battles are waged not only against illness, but within the hearts of those we once held dear. In Melissa's warm embrace, I found solace and the tiny seed of hope that someday I might reclaim the light within me. The days at her house melted into weeks, which in turn blurred into months, and through it all, her unwavering support illuminated the dark corners of my soul. Despite the hardships of treatment and the relentless pain, I began to rebuild my life in a humble, picturesque town, a place where no one knew my past, and every sunrise held the promise of renewal. Stepping off the taxi in front of my modest new apartment perched on a cliff, I was met by Sandra, my neighbor, whose kindly smile offered immediate comfort. Over warm tea on her balcony, Sandra's gentle words suggested that sometimes a fresh start is exactly what our weary hearts crave, and in time, her simple wisdom helped mend the fractures within me. As I gradually immersed myself in the town's life, roaming cobblestone streets, admiring ancient bridges, and forging bonds with genuine souls, I discovered a poster at the local health center advertising a cancer support group. With a racing heart, I resolved to attend the next meeting. Entering the room filled with faces etched by battle and hope, I was welcomed by Megan, a middle-aged woman whose colorful headscarf and empathetic smile offered me a haven of acceptance. I revealed my name and my story, my voice flowing with the torrent of my emotions, and soon, I discovered that in that circle, every tale of hardship resonated as an ode to hope and resilience. When it was my turn to speak, my narrative spilled out like a raging river, detailing my diagnosis, the cruelty of my family's reaction, and my desperate decision to sever those toxic bonds. A man named Michael, moved by my testimony, remarked that my daring act of leaving was perhaps the only path toward healing. Emerging from that first meeting, I felt a lightness I had not known in months, a sense of belonging that nurtured both my wounded body and soul. As days turned into months, the support group became a sanctuary where I gleaned practical advice on battling the relentless side effects of treatment and learned to nurture a positive outlook despite the ceaseless challenges. My budding friendship with Sandra blossomed into deep mutual understanding, her stories of yesteryear intertwining with my city-weary recollections, each conversation a soft salve to my inner scars. One poignant morning, as I sipped coffee in a sunlit plaza, I discovered the support group was more than a source of practical tips. It was where stories of fear and triumph merged into a tapestry of shared humanity. Megan's gentle encouragement led me to keep a journal, a sacred repository of my darkest thoughts and brightest revelations, which, when shared at meetings, inspired others to believe in their strength to overcome. Over time, as the town embraced me like one of its own, I began to wonder about Andrew, Donna, and Charlotte. Though painful memories stirred, I felt only distant compassion, a quiet acceptance that they had forfeited their chance to join me on this journey of rebirth. Years later, as I stood on the same trail where a spark of revelation had once ignited my soul, the setting sun painted the valley in hues of gold and rose. I exhaled deeply, whispering thank you to the gentle wind, uncertain whether I was thanking life, fate, or merely the resilient spirit within me. My struggle with leukemia had been a brutal crucible, yet it forged a luminous strength and purpose from the depths of betrayal and sorrow. That very strength fueled my audacious decision to found an organization, Light in the Storm, a beacon for those grappling with cancer and the isolation that often accompanies it. With Megan's enthusiastic support, and countless sleepless nights spent drafting plans and rallying volunteers, our nonprofit blossomed from a modest idea into a sprawling network that offered a lifeline across cities. On opening day, as I ceremoniously cut a red ribbon before a chorus of supporters and local journalists, I felt both pride and humility, knowing that my story belonged not only to me but to every soul who fought their silent battles. Our rapid expansion, marked by the establishment of helplines and wellness workshops, unexpectedly led me to the national stage when a television producer invited me to share my journey. In the stark green room of a bustling studio, I prepared to bare my soul on live TV, recounting my harrowing diagnosis, the callous rejection by those I loved, and the unyielding hope that had carried me through. With tears glistening in my eyes, I spoke of the importance of leaning on one another, of never surrendering to despair, and of embracing the truth that we are far stronger than we ever believed. The overwhelming response, thousands of messages, heartfelt letters, and calls for support, transformed my struggle into a nationwide movement. Among the many letters was one from Sophia, a 16-year-old girl, whose tear-streaked confession told of how my story had rekindled her hope in the fight against leukemia. Each message, each shared struggle, reinforced why I had built Light in the Storm in the first place. As international cancer conferences beckoned, alliances with hospitals and research centers flourished, and a scholarship program to empower young researchers was born, I found myself evolving from a patient to a pioneer, a survivor whose battles had seeded change. 9 years after that fateful diagnosis, I stood on a stage receiving an award for Light in the Storm, gazing out at a sea of faces: Megan, Sandra, members of our original support group, and countless volunteers. In my acceptance speech, tears blurred my vision as I spoke passionately of every patient, every volunteer, and every kind soul who had helped transform despair into a radiant purpose. I remembered the terrified Haley of years past and marveled at the miracle of survival and strength that had blossomed from the wreckage. Then, on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon in the Light in the Storm office, as the warm sunlight streamed through the windows, my phone buzzed with a name that froze my blood: Andrew, my ex-husband, the man who had scorned my suffering nearly a decade ago. Hesitantly, I answered and was met with a voice laden with trembling desperation, a voice unrecognizable from the one that had once mocked me. Andrew's confession spilled out amidst hesitant pauses. Donna, my former mother-in-law, now lay dying from terminal pancreatic cancer, and Charlotte, my daughter, now 19, was spiraling into a darkness of her own. The collapse of time and wounds long buried converged into one cruel, dissonant moment as Andrew implored me for help, confessing that they had been irrevocably wrong and that, witnessing Donna's suffering and Charlotte's despair, they now needed me. A torrent of conflicting emotions surged within me, an amalgam of reluctant compassion and seething resentment. Memories of that cold, heartless laughter clashed with the gnawing realization of how deeply pain could transform hearts. I asked for time to reflect, and after our conversation ended, I sat in quiet agony as the sunset bled red and gold into the sky, a mirror to the tumult inside me. In the ensuing days, as the rain pattered on my window and I wrestled with the weight of old wounds and new responsibilities, I reached out to Megan and our dedicated team at Light in the Storm. In their steady, compassionate counsel, I found the courage to confront this perilous crossroad. Late one stormy afternoon, after seeking solace in a quiet church, where stained glass and candlelight wove a tapestry of hope, I emerged with newfound clarity. I could not undo the past, but I could choose to shine a light into its dark corners. With trembling resolve, I decided to help Andrew, Donna, and Charlotte, not to mend every broken fragment of our shared history, but to ensure that no one else would be abandoned in their hour of need. That decision was not made lightly. It was forged in the fiery crucible of my own suffering and tempered by the unwavering strength that had carried me this far. I arranged a meeting with Andrew in a quiet office, where he recounted the devastating revelations: Donna's terminal diagnosis, Charlotte's spiraling behavior culminating in a near-fatal overdose, and the profound remorse that had begun to seep into their lives. With each word, memories of my own abandonment surged forth, yet through the haze of betrayal, I recognized the chance to be a beacon of healing once more. With a voice steady yet laced with residual pain, I promised that I would help, on my own terms, setting boundaries that acknowledged the irreparable scars of the past. As I left that meeting, the rain outside washed away remnants of old sorrow, and I prepared to re-enter a world I had long fled. The following days were a frenzied montage of practical arrangements and emotional reckonings. I found myself haunted by an old photograph of Charlotte and me, a bittersweet reminder of a time when love had seemed uncomplicated. Then, with a heavy heart and a suitcase in hand, I boarded a plane bound for the city where, 9 years ago, I had been a broken, frightened soul. Megan stayed by my side until the last moment, her gentle reminder that I was that light for others echoing in my heart. As the plane ascended, leaving behind familiar landscapes and painful memories, I clutched the strength of my new self, a survivor, a healer, a beacon of hope. Landing in the city, I was greeted not by scorn, but by a transformed Andrew, his once arrogant demeanor replaced by guilt and weariness. Driving through streets that held my shattered past, I arrived at the hospital where Donna lay. Her frail, pale presence was a stark contrast to the domineering woman I once knew. With tears in her eyes, she murmured apologies that stirred the final echoes of my own despair. Later, meeting Charlotte at a treatment facility, I was met with a hesitant, fragile cry, a single, shattering word, "Mom." That moment, fraught with pain and tentative reconciliation, marked the beginning of a turbulent yet necessary healing process. In the weeks that followed, as Donna's life quietly ebbed away, and Charlotte and I began to reconstruct a relationship built on raw honesty and cautious compassion, I discovered that the power to heal was not confined solely to the physical battle against leukemia. It extended to the emotional restoration of those hearts long wounded by neglect and cruelty. Light in the Storm evolved, branching out into programs dedicated to family reconciliation and healing, offering others the chance to mend bonds shattered by life's cruelty. Charlotte, inspired by our fragile reunion, embarked on studies in psychology, determined to become a force for compassion in a world that had once so callously dismissed our pain. As I stood on a cliff-top path at dusk, gazing over a valley bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, I felt a deep, abiding peace. Life, with all its unpredictable twists and heart-wrenching turns, had taught me that even the darkest nights hold the promise of dawn. In that silent, golden moment, as Charlotte quietly joined me and we embraced the tender certainty of new beginnings, I realized that sometimes it is through our deepest wounds that the brightest lights emerge. And so, with the mountains silhouetted against a twilight sky and my heart steadfast in its newfound purpose, I stepped forward into a future where every storm could be met with a resolute, unwavering light.